Greetings again, YouTubers, aviators, and aviation enthusiasts. My name is Don. Welcome back to my channel.
Terrain.
Thanks for watching.
System not available.
As you can hear, today I decided to film a video sitting inside my airplane. I'm in my P210 in my hangar. Thought it would be more fun than me sitting in my car. Give you something actually aviation related to look at. I just finished shooting a video talking about my plane. So if you're interested in that, please have a look. I wanted to do an edition of What I Wish I Knew this morning. About something that doesn't get a lot of coverage, but I've actually realized is critically important as I've evolved my career and gone from flying single engine, single pilot, Part 91, up to flying in a crew environment in a jet. And that's the idea of a departure briefing. Developing a good crew briefing is a mandatory part of learning to fly a jet. And at Flight Safety, if you're headed that direction, when you get back there, you'll be expected to deliver crew briefings. It's not a super huge part of the training experience, but it's something that will probably be new to you if you're like me and have only flown single pilot, especially single engines. So the nature of the crew briefing is such that what I've learned and what I wish I'd known is, having developed a professional crew briefing, it's really helpful when I go back into my own plane as a single pilot and get ready for a flight. And I'll talk about why in a sec. Now let's talk about that pre-flight passenger brief for a moment. I always felt a little unsure about how much detail to go into. So for example, if I was flying with another pilot, I would always explain, how do I use the seat belts? My airplane happens to have aftermarket harnesses in it. How do you open the emergency exit door? I showed you that in an earlier video. I'll talk about, maybe some of the plans if I lose an engine, but it didn't feel really natural, and it didn't feel really regimented, and it didn't really sort of flow out of my mouth. Now, after flying jets and coming up with a very regimented, repeated procedure, I really see the value of the pre-departure briefing taken back down to Part 91 single pilot operations. Let me talk a little bit more about that. So in the jet, we do a pre-departure briefing before we even start the engines. Typically, we'll talk about everything from how we're taxiing out, what departure procedure are we expecting. We'll also then talk about what if we have any problems. And in a jet, for those of you who haven't flown one yet, or even in a big twin, you're going to learn that there are several critical phases of flight that happen before you even get into flight. One of those being what's termed V1. V1 is decision speed, and that's a speed at which you will take the airplane into the air, even if you have a significant failure, rather than risking, and you will run off the end of the runway at high speed, because the computer has calculated at V1 you just don't have enough runway left to stop. The way we typically brief that is we'll talk about anything below a certain target speed, usually 70 or 80 knots. We will abort the takeoff for any reason. So if we get anything that causes us to say we want to stop, it could be even a white cast message. It could be we heard a noise, whatever it was. We'll abort the takeoff. Then between 80 knots and V1, which is our decision speed, we're only going to abort for what we call the big four: engine failure, engine fire, thrust reverser deployment, or loss of control of the aircraft. Other than that, if we're above V1, we're going to, as we brief, take it into the air and deal with it as an in-flight emergency. And then we'll talk about, are we going to come back to the airport we just departed from? Are we going to go to another airport? If we're at Hayward, we're probably going to Oakland. If we're at Tahoe, South Lake, Truckee, Tahoe, we're probably going to Reno, things like that. Now, that's all great, and you'll if you're headed to jets, headed to big twins, you're going to need to develop your own pre-departure briefing. Why do I make such a big deal out of how that can help us single engine piston and single pilot operators? Well, I found that by using a regimented departure brief, what I use now in my P210, highly borrowed from what I do in the jet, I'll say below 50 knots, we can abort for any reason. If a door pops open, if something doesn't feel right. Between 50 knots and rotation speed, we're only going to abort for a significant failure, loss of power, complete or partial, control problem. And then if we're above rotation speed, 65 to 70 knots in my airplane, we're going to take it into the air and we're going to deal with it as an in-flight emergency. I then further brief, because I'm a single engine, right? If we lose an engine between, say, 0 and 400 feet, what I'm going to do is at my home airport, I'm going to take it straight off. I'm probably going to veer a little bit right There's a big marsh. We're going to probably go in gear up, and we're going to have a story to tell, and we're going to walk away from it. It's between 400 feet and 1,000 feet. That can get into there's whole discussions about the impossible turn. And in my mind, probably what I'm going to do is do a more stabilized approach into the marsh, which is out to the east of our airport here. If I'm over 1,000 feet, I may have some options to return. There's another airport that would be basically, I'd be right set up for a straight in for one of their runways, and I would probably go ahead and execute that option. Now, why does all that matter? Well, what I've found is sometimes I'll get to the airport, I'm going on a pleasure flight, I've got the dogs, I've got the wife, whatever it may be, and I'm not into flying. When I'm flying the jet, the moment I pull up to the hangar, I'm already in pro mode, right? Not always the case when I'm flying single pilot Part 91. It's a beautiful day, we're going to be VFR in VMC. We're not thinking about maybe all the nuances of carrying passengers under Part 135. The departure brief, I've found, when I use it in my plane, really gets me into the flying mode. It gets me thinking about, what am I really going to do if something goes wrong at a different phase of flight, at a different part of my takeoff? Now, I happen to have had 2 engine failures on takeoff. I've had some events on takeoff that were minor, but had I not been on top of my game, could have turned into a big problem. Fortunately, in both the engine failure instances, it was very early in the takeoff roll. I had plenty of runway. I don't even think I got to 40 knots. And then one of the instances was in my Cirrus, a door popped open. Now, I didn't worry about it, but my passengers freaked out. And that freak out, fortunately, and because I had actually practiced that maneuver with my instructor during Cirrus training, I didn't let that freak out affect me. But those are the kind of things, those unexpected, especially if they involve a bunch of noise. In my airplane, if the emergency exit were to somehow come open, that is going to be a horrifically noisy event, and airflow and things are going to be flying around the cabin. So it's really important for me as the pilot to recognize that that is a non-critical thing, and to just, especially again, if I'm above 50 knots, above 60 knots, right around rotation, I just got to keep flying. No different than when the window popped open in our 182 over the Midwest when I was in my teens doing our cross-country flight. Got a lot of our tensions, but it was not an emergency. Anyway, that's enough about pre-departure briefs, and I hope you find that helpful, and more content coming soon. Thanks for watching.